London, 1875. The arrow struck just inches from Evangeline Hartley's hand, embedding itself in the oak specimen table with a force that sent her carefully labeled plant samples scattering across the floor. But it was not an arrow at all. It was a rolled document, sealed with wax the color of old blood and tied with black ribbon. Evangeline stared at it for a long moment before her hands, steady despite the shock, reached out to pull it free. She was 24 years old, fiercely independent, and had spent the better part of the morning cataloguing rare ferns from the Scottish Highlands. The last thing she expected was a dramatic interruption in her makeshift laboratory, a converted conservatory her mother barely tolerated. "Miss Hartley?" The voice came from the doorway. A man stood there, thin and severe in black clothing that seemed to absorb the afternoon light. "I am Mr. Pemberton's solicitor. I apologize for the theatrical delivery, but I was instructed that the matter was urgent." "You threw a legal document at me like a javelin," Evangeline said, her voice remarkably calm. "I should think urgent is an understatement." "Indeed." Mr. Pemberton moved into the room with the careful steps of a man navigating unfamiliar territory. His eyes swept over the specimens, the microscope, the rows of carefully pressed flowers, and his mouth tightened with what might have been disapproval. "I have come regarding a contract signed 17 years ago by your late father and one Lord Nathaniel Blackwood, also deceased." Evangeline's fingers worked at the seal. "My father has been dead for 3 years. Whatever debts he left, I assure you we have been managing them as best we can. This is not a debt, Miss Hartley. It is a betrothal." The document unfurled in her hands. The words swam before her eyes: betrothal, binding agreement, legal obligation, and there, at the bottom, her father's signature next to another she did not recognize. "This is impossible," she whispered. "I have never heard of any such arrangement." "Neither, I suspect, has the gentleman in question." Mr. Pemberton produced a second document from his leather case. "Lord Nathaniel Blackwood and your father were friends in their youth. They made this arrangement when you were 7 years old, agreeing that you would marry Lord Nathaniel's son, Adrian Blackwood, when certain conditions were met." "What conditions?" "Financial ones, primarily. Your father's portion of a joint investment had to mature. Lord Nathaniel's estate had to clear certain debts." The solicitor's voice was flat, reciting facts like a man reading from a ledger. "Both fathers died before these conditions were met. Both, it seems, failed to inform their children of the arrangement." Evangeline sank into her chair, still holding the document. "And now? Now the conditions have been satisfied. The contract activates. You have 30 days to marry Adrian Blackwood, or your family's estate reverts to the Blackwood holdings as penalty for breach of contract." "That is absurd. I cannot be held to an agreement I never made." "Your father made it on your behalf. It is legally binding." Mr. Pemberton's expression softened slightly. "I am sorry, Miss Hartley, but the law is quite clear." After he left, Evangeline sat in the wreckage of her afternoon, the contract still clutched in her hands. 30 days. 30 days to marry a complete stranger or lose everything. Her mother would be devastated. The estate was all they had left after her father's gambling debts had consumed most of their fortune. But something else caught her eye as she read through the contract more carefully. A list of transactions, attached as an appendix, regular payments to various scientific societies and institutions, and there, among the beneficiaries, her own name. She rose and went to her correspondence desk, pulling out folders of letters. For the past 3 years, she had been receiving botanical specimens from an anonymous donor. Rare plants, carefully preserved, always accompanied by notes in an elegant hand suggesting avenues of research. She had assumed it was some wealthy patron who had read her papers in obscure scientific journals. The handwriting on the appendix matched the handwriting on those notes. Adrian Blackwood had been sending her plants for 3 years. He had been supporting her research, encouraging her work, corresponding with her about scientific matters, and he had no idea she was his betrothed, just as she had no idea he was hers. Evangeline made her decision quickly. She would not be a pawn in some dead men's agreement. She would investigate this Adrian Blackwood first, and if he proved unsuitable, she would find a way out of this contract, law or no law. The journey to Yorkshire took 2 days. Evangeline told her mother she was visiting a colleague, which was not entirely a lie. She travelled light, bringing only her field equipment and enough clothing for a week's stay. The countryside grew wilder as the train carried her north, cultivated fields giving way to rough moorland, gentle hills becoming harsh tors. Thornwood Hall appeared through the mist like something from a Gothic novel. The estate was larger than she had expected, but clearly neglected. Gardens had gone wild, walls showed cracks, and several windows on the upper floors were shuttered. It looked less like a gentleman's residence and more like a place where secrets went to hide. She had sent no word of her arrival. Her plan was simple: present herself as a traveling botanist, seeking shelter for a few days while she studied the local flora. It would give her time to observe Adrian Blackwood, to determine what manner of man he was before revealing the truth of their connection. The door opened before she could knock. A man stood there, and Evangeline's carefully prepared speech died in her throat. He was younger than she expected, perhaps 28, with dark hair that needed cutting and eyes the color of storm clouds. He wore no jacket. His shirt sleeves rolled to his elbows, and there was dirt under his fingernails. He looked like he had been working with plants, not like a lord in his ancestral home. "Can I help you?" His voice was cultured but wary. "I am Miss Hartley, a botanist. I am traveling through the region studying moorland flora, and I was wondering if you might have room for a lodger. Just for a few days." She kept her voice professional, businesslike. "I can pay for my accommodation." His eyes narrowed slightly. "You are a long way from anywhere, Miss Hartley. There are inns in the village." "The innkeeper directed me here," he said. She paused, choosing her words carefully. "He said you had an interest in botanical matters." Something shifted in his expression. "Did he? What else did he say? That you are reclusive, that you rarely leave the estate, that the villagers—" She stopped. "That the villagers cross themselves when they mention my name?" A bitter smile touched his mouth. "I imagine they told you about the affliction as well." "They mentioned something, but I do not put stock in village gossip." He studied her for a long moment, and she had the unsettling feeling that he could see right through her pretense. Then he stepped back, opening the door wider. "Very well. I could use the help, actually. My greenhouse collection is dying, and I cannot determine why. If you can solve that problem, Miss Hartley, you may stay as long as you like." The interior of Thornwood Hall was as neglected as the exterior. Dust covers draped furniture in the main rooms. Portraits of stern-faced ancestors watched from the walls. But when Adrian led her through the house to the conservatory, everything changed. The greenhouse was magnificent. Glass walls rose 2 stories high, filled with plants from every corner of the world. Orchids cascaded from hanging baskets. Ferns unfurled in shaded corners. A small fountain provided humidity, its gentle splash the only sound in the vast space. But he was right. The plants were dying. Brown edges on leaves, drooping stems, a general air of sickness that made Evangeline's botanist heart ache. "When did this start?" she asked, already moving among the specimens, her fingers gentle on wilting leaves. 3 weeks ago. I have tried everything I can think of, adjusted watering, changed the soil, checked for pests. Nothing works." His voice was frustrated, almost desperate. "These plants are my life's work, Miss Hartley. If I cannot save them—" He did not finish the sentence. He did not need to. She understood. For someone like him, isolated and alone, these plants were not just specimens, they were companions. "I will need to run some tests," she said. "Check the water source, examine the soil composition, look for fungal infections or mineral deficiencies. It will take time. Time is one thing I have in abundance." That bitter smile again. "I should warn you, Miss Hartley. I cannot work during the day, only at dawn, dusk, and through the night. You will have the greenhouse to yourself during daylight hours. Your affliction? Photosensitivity. Sunlight causes me severe pain and can damage my skin. I am, quite literally, a creature of the night." He said it matter-of-factly, as though he had long since accepted this limitation. "It is why I rarely leave the estate." Why the villagers think I am cursed or mad or worse. And the greenhouse? The glass is specially treated, filters the harmful wavelengths. I can be here at twilight without harm. He moved to a work table covered with notes and sketches. I work at night, mostly. Study the plants, make observations, correspond with other botanists. It is a lonely existence, but it is mine. Evangeline felt something twist in her chest. This was the man who had been sending her specimens, supporting her research. This isolated, brilliant scholar who could only experience the world by moonlight. "We will work in shifts then," she said briskly, pushing down the unwanted sympathy. "I will work days. You work nights. We can leave notes for each other about our findings." "Notes?" He looked at her strangely. "Yes, notes might work very well." That first day set the pattern. Evangeline rose early and went straight to the greenhouse, beginning her systematic examination of every plant, every pot, every element of the environment. She took soil samples, tested the water, examined leaves under her portable microscope. She made careful notes of everything she observed, leaving them on the work table for Adrian to read. When she returned to the greenhouse at dusk to retrieve something she had forgotten, she found her notes covered with Adrian's responses. He had read everything she wrote, added his own observations in the margins, sketched diagrams to illustrate points she had made. His handwriting was the same elegant script from the letters that had accompanied the plant specimens. She stayed, reading his notes by the fading light, and found herself smiling. He was brilliant. His observations were acute, his questions insightful. Reading his notes was like having a conversation with the finest scientific mind she had ever encountered. "You are still here." She looked up to find him standing in the doorway, jacket on now, looking more like the lord of the manor and less like a laborer. The twilight suited him, casting his features in interesting shadows. "I was reading your notes," she said. "You have a remarkable eye for detail. As do you." He moved into the greenhouse, and she noticed he moved confidently in the dim light, no hesitation in his steps. "Your hypothesis about the water source is intriguing. I had not considered mineral contamination from the estate's old pipes." They talked then, standing among the dying plants as darkness fell, about botany and chemistry and the complex ecosystems that sustained life. Evangeline forgot to be guarded, forgot she was supposed to be investigating him. She simply talked with someone who understood her passion, who shared her curiosity, who saw the world through the same lens of scientific wonder. When she finally returned to the house, it was full, dark, and she realized with a start that she had spent nearly 2 hours in conversation with Adrian Blackwood without once thinking about the contract or the betrothal or any of the practical reasons she had come to Thornwood Hall. The days fell into a rhythm. Evangeline worked through the sunlight hours, conducting tests, eliminating possibilities, narrowing down the source of the blight affecting the greenhouse. She left detailed notes for Adrian and found increasingly detailed responses waiting for her each morning. Their paper correspondence became something more than just scientific exchange. Adrian began adding small observations about the beauty of certain plants at night, how they looked under moonlight, the way nocturnal insects visited certain flowers. He sketched scenes from his nighttime hours, the greenhouse under stars, an owl perched on the glass roof, frost patterns on the windows. Evangeline found herself responding in kind, adding notes about how the morning light transformed certain specimens, the way dew collected on petals, the sound of birdsong in the early hours. She began sketching, too, small illustrations in the margins of her reports. They were creating something together, she realized. A composite picture of the greenhouse through all hours, merging their different perspectives into something richer than either could achieve alone. But they still rarely saw each other, just those brief twilight encounters when their schedules overlapped. And in those moments, standing in the fading light among the plants, Evangeline felt something growing that had nothing to do with botany. She was falling for him, for his brilliant mind, yes, but also for his loneliness, carefully hidden behind scientific detachment, for the way he talked about plants with such tenderness, for the kindness in his notes, always encouraging her work, never dismissing her ideas simply because she was a woman in a field dominated by men. And she hated herself for the deception. He did not know who she was, did not know about the contract that bound them. She was studying him like one of her botanical specimens, observing and recording while he thought she was just a fellow scientist seeking temporary shelter. 2 weeks into her stay, Evangeline discovered Adrian's private study quite by accident. She had been looking for a particular reference book he had mentioned and followed the butler's directions to what she thought was the library. Instead, she found herself in a round tower room filled with astronomical equipment. Charts covered the walls, not maps of the Earth, but maps of the heavens. A massive telescope stood by the window, pointed skyward. Journals lay open on a desk, filled with observations and calculations and beautiful sketches of constellations. She should have left immediately. This was clearly Adrian's private sanctuary, not meant for visitors, but she could not help herself. She moved through the room, touching the telescope, examining the charts, reading the journal entries left open on the desk. The loneliness in those entries broke her heart. Adrian wrote about the night sky the way most people wrote about their dearest friends. The stars were his companions, the moon his confidant. He charted their movements with the precision of a scientist and the passion of a poet. And there, in a recent entry, words that made her breath catch. A botanist has come to Thornwood. She works by day while I work by night, and we communicate through notes like scholars separated by centuries rather than hours. I find myself looking forward to reading her observations each evening, to seeing how her mind works through problems. She sees the greenhouse differently than I do, where I see shadow and mystery. She sees light and clarity. Together, our perspectives create something whole. Finally, someone who sees the plants and not the monster. Evangeline closed the journal with shaking hands. She should feel guilty for reading his private thoughts. Instead, she felt something else entirely: recognition, because she had been writing similar thoughts in her own journal, carefully hidden in her room. She left the study quickly, but the words stayed with her. Someone who sees the plants and not the monster. Was that how he saw himself? A monster to be feared and avoided? That evening, she waited in the greenhouse at twilight, determined to see him, to talk to him properly instead of just leaving notes like ships passing in the night. He arrived as the sun set, surprised to find her there. "Miss Hartley, is something wrong?" "No. I simply thought we have been working together for 2 weeks now, and we barely know each other beyond our scientific correspondence." She gestured to the bench near the fountain. "Will you sit with me, just for a few minutes?" He hesitated, and she saw the wariness in his eyes. But then he nodded and sat, maintaining a careful distance between them. "What would you like to know?" he asked. "Why astronomy?" "I noticed you have a telescope." "The night sky is the only world I can fully experience," he said simply. "I cannot see the day, cannot walk in sunlight, cannot participate in normal society. But the stars? They are mine. I can study them, map them, lose myself in their movements. They do not care that I am different." "You are not so different," Evangeline said softly. "You simply experience the world at different hours than most people. That is a kind way of describing my affliction. It is not an affliction. It is a condition, one that has shaped your perspective but does not define your worth." She met his eyes in the fading light. "Do you know what I see when I look at your work? Brilliance, dedication, a mind that notices things others overlook precisely because you see the world differently." He stared at her, and something shifted in his expression. "You truly mean that?" "I do." And she did. Every word. Whatever pretense had brought her to Thornwood Hall, whatever deception underlay her presence, this truth was absolute. "I have read your notes, Adrian. I have seen your sketches, your observations, the way you think about the natural world. You are one of the finest scientists I have ever encountered. I could say the same about you." His voice was rough. "Your work is extraordinary, Miss Hartley. The way you approach problems, the thoroughness of your methods, the creativity of your hypotheses. You should be at university, teaching, publishing papers, receiving recognition for your talents. Women are not welcome in those spaces." then those spaces are poorer for it. He said it with such conviction that she felt tears prick her eyes. You deserve better than working in isolation, sending papers to journals that will reject them simply because of your gender. They talked until full dark about science and society, about the barriers they both faced, his physical limitations, her gender-based restrictions. It was the longest conversation they had ever had, and when Evangeline finally returned to the house, she felt as though something fundamental had shifted between them. She was not just studying him anymore, she was connecting with him, and the guilt of her deception was becoming unbearable. 3 weeks into her stay, Evangeline finally identified the source of the greenhouse blight. It was in the water, as she had suspected, but not from the pipes. Someone had been adding a growth supplement to the watering system, an old-fashioned mixture that included compounds harmful to the specific varieties of plants Adrian cultivated. She traced it back to an elderly groundskeeper who had been trying to help, using methods he remembered from 40 years ago when the estate was in its prime. He had meant well, but the plants had been slowly poisoned by his kindness. Evangeline prepared her full report, complete with recommendations for flushing the system, replacing the soil in affected pots, and proper care going forward. She left it on the work table with a sense of accomplishment. She had done what Adrian needed. The plants could be saved, but she knew her time at Thornwood was running out. She had been here 3 weeks. The deadline for the betrothal was 1 week away. She needed to tell him, needed to reveal who she really was, why she had really come. But every time she tried to form the words, her courage failed, because she knew that once he learned the truth, everything would change. This fragile connection they had built, this partnership of minds and growing feelings, it would all be poisoned by the knowledge that she had been deceiving him from the start. The decision was taken from her hands. She was working in the greenhouse the next afternoon when she heard raised voices from the house. Then Adrian appeared, moving through the sunlit space with a newspaper in his hand, his face dark with fury. He must have been in pain. The daylight streaming through the filtered glass was enough to cause him discomfort, but he seemed not to notice. "Did you know?" He thrust the newspaper at her. "Is that why you were here?" Evangeline looked at the paper and felt her heart sink. There, in the society section, a notice of betrothal. Evangeline Hartley to Adrian Blackwood, contracted 17 years prior, to be solemnized within the month. Someone had leaked it to the press. The secret was out. "Did you know?" he asked again, his voice tight with barely controlled anger. She could have lied, could have claimed she was as surprised as he was, but she had deceived him enough. "Yes," she said quietly, "I knew. The silence that followed was terrible." "How long?" "From the beginning. The solicitor came to me a month ago. That is why I came here. 2, she forced herself to meet his eyes, to investigate you, to see what manner of man I was being forced to marry before I decided whether to honor the contract or find a way to break it. So all of this," his voice was harsh. "The botanical work, the notes, the conversations, you were studying me, like one of your specimens, observing the strange creature in his natural habitat. No, it was not like that. Was any of it real?" The pain in his voice cut deeper than anger would have. Or was I simply an interesting problem to solve, the peculiar recluse with his dying plants and his affliction? "Did you laugh about it in your journal? Today the monster showed me his observatory. How charmingly pathetic." "Stop it!" Evangeline felt tears on her face. "Yes, I came here to investigate you. Yes, I deceived you about my reasons, but everything else was real. Every conversation, every note, every observation I shared with you, that was genuine. How can I believe that? How can I believe anything you say when you have been lying from the moment you arrived?" "Because I fell in love with you," the words burst out before she could stop them. "I fell in love with your brilliant mind and your careful observations and the way you see beauty in darkness. I fell in love with the man in the letters, the man in the greenhouse, the man who understands what it means to be excluded from the world you long to be part of. That was not an act, Adrian. That was the truest thing I have ever felt." He stared at her, breathing hard, the newspaper crumpled in his fist. "You should have told me." "I know. You should have trusted me with the truth." "I know." She wiped at her tears. I am sorry. I am so sorry. But I cannot regret coming here, because despite the deception, despite everything, I found you, and you found me. And what we created together in this greenhouse that was real, Adrian, that was real. Get out. The words were quiet, final. Adrian. I said get out. Be gone by morning. I do not care what happens with the contract. I do not care about the estate. I just want you gone. He left, still moving through the painful daylight, and Evangeline stood among the plants they had saved together, her heart breaking. She packed that night, moving through the house like a ghost. She left all her research notes on his desk, weeks of work, carefully organized, complete with recommendations for future care of the greenhouse. It was the only gift she could give him now. But she could not resist leaving one more note, tucked into the research papers. You asked if any of it was real. All of it was real. Every word I wrote to you, every observation I shared, every moment of joy I found in our work together. I came here to study a stranger. I found instead a kindred spirit. I am sorry I did not have the courage to tell you sooner. I am sorry I let deception poison what might have been beautiful. But I am not sorry I came. Because knowing you, even briefly, even under false pretenses, has been the greatest discovery of my life. I hope you can forgive me someday. But even if you cannot, please know this. You are not a monster. You are brilliant and kind and worthy of so much more than loneliness. I hope you find happiness, even if it cannot be with me. She left before dawn, not wanting to risk seeing him again, knowing she could not bear it. The journey back to London passed in a blur. Evangeline stared out the train window, seeing nothing, her mind replaying every moment at Thornwood, every conversation, every note. The way Adrian's face had looked in the twilight, the sound of his voice when he talked about the stars, the way his expression had shattered when he learned the truth. At home, her mother was waiting with questions, but Evangeline could not face them. She retreated to her laboratory and tried to lose herself in work, but every specimen reminded her of the greenhouse. Every plant made her think of Adrian. She had 1 week until the deadline, 1 week to either marry Adrian Blackwood or lose the estate, and she could not imagine doing either. Her mother tried introducing her to other gentlemen, potential husbands who might save them from financial ruin. Evangeline could barely look at them. They were not Adrian. They did not understand her work. They did not see the world through the lens of wonder and curiosity. They were kind, respectable, utterly wrong. She spent the days in her laboratory and the nights unable to sleep, staring at the ceiling, remembering conversations by twilight, notes written in elegant script, the way Adrian's eyes had softened when he looked at her work. 1 week became 5 days, became 3 days. On the morning of the second to last day, her mother came to the laboratory with an announcement. Lord Pemberton is here. He says you must make your decision today. Either sign the marriage documents or sign papers forfeiting the estate. Evangeline looked at the papers spread before her, her research, her life's work, everything she had built in isolation. Without the estate, she would have nothing, no laboratory, no resources. She would have to take a position as a governess or lady's companion, giving up science entirely. But she could not marry Adrian. Not after what had happened. Not when he hated her. I will sign the forfeiture, she said quietly. Her mother gasped. Evangeline, you cannot. I can and I will. I will not force myself on a man who wants nothing to do with me. She picked up a pen. Bring me the documents. That will not be necessary. The voice came from the doorway. Evangeline spun around, her heart stopping. Adrian stood there, looking travel-worn and exhausted. He wore the same clothes he had worn the day she left. His hair was disheveled, his face drawn. He looked like he had not slept in days. What are you doing here? She whispered. Stopping you from making a terrible mistake. He moved into the laboratory, and she saw he carried papers of his own. I have a proposition for you, Evangeline. A better solution than either of us sacrificing everything. He spread the papers on her work table. Legal documents, dense with text. I have had the betrothal contract modified, he said. We marry to satisfy its terms and preserve your estate, but with an addition and annulment clause. After 1 year, either of us can dissolve the marriage. No fault, no blame. You will be free." Evangeline stared at him. "Why would you do this?" "Because despite everything, despite my anger and hurt, I do not want to see you lose your life's work." His voice was rough. "Because I understand what it means to have passion and purpose taken away. Because," he stopped, took a breath, "because I was wrong to send you away. You should have told me the truth sooner, yes. But I understand why you did not. I am not an easy man to approach, not an easy man to know. Adrian, let me finish." He pulled out another document. "This is a letter from the Royal Botanical Society. I have secured you a position on their expedition to the Amazon. It departs in 3 months. You will go as Mrs. Blackwood, with full funding and access to all my scientific contacts. When you return in 6 months, if you choose to annul our marriage, you will have your freedom, your expedition credentials, and your family's estate will remain secure." She could barely breathe. "You did this? For me?" "I did it because it is what you deserve, what you have always deserved." His eyes met hers. "You told me once that I was not a monster. You gave me that gift, even when I did not believe it. Let me give you this gift in return, the chance to pursue your dreams without having to sacrifice everything. And what will you do while I am in the Amazon?" His smile was small, sad. "Wait, hope, and prove to you that some accidents are actually fate. You want me to go?" She felt tears starting again. "You want me to leave?" "I want you to have the choice I never had. To experience the world fully, to make your discoveries, to return knowing you chose this life rather than having it forced upon you." He stepped closer. "Marry me for practical reasons, Evangeline, but give me 1 year to court you properly, to earn what was accidentally promised. And if at the end of that year you still want your freedom, I will give it gladly. And if I do not want my freedom?" Something flickered in his eyes. "Hope, carefully guarded. Then we will see. But you must make that choice of your own will, not because a contract forces you, not because circumstances trap you, because you want it." Evangeline looked at the documents, at the Amazon expedition letter, at the modified contract that gave her everything she had ever wanted: freedom, adventure, the chance to prove herself as a scientist. And time. Time to know if what she felt for Adrian was real or simply the product of moonlit greenhouses and shared isolation. "There is one condition," she said softly. "What?" "Promise me you will write, while I am gone. Not as the anonymous benefactor sending specimens, but as yourself. Tell me about the greenhouse, the stars, your work. Let me know you. I promise. Then yes, I will marry you, Adrian Blackwood, for practical reasons and impractical hopes." They were married 3 days later in a small ceremony with few witnesses. Evangeline wore a simple dress. Adrian wore dark glasses even in the dim church, protecting his sensitive eyes. They spoke vows that included additions written in both their hands, promises to partnership, not possession. Her mother wept, though whether from joy or relief, Evangeline could not say. That night, instead of the traditional wedding expectations, Adrian took her to his observatory. They climbed the tower stairs together, emerging into the round room full of stars. "I want to show you something," he said, adjusting the telescope. "Look here." Evangeline peered through the eyepiece and saw a star, burning bright against the velvet darkness. "I named it for you," Adrian said quietly. "Weeks ago, before everything fell apart. Evangeline's star. Because you brought light into my darkness, even when I did not know your name." She straightened, turning to him, and found him watching her with an expression that stole her breath. "I have something for you as well." He handed her a leather-bound journal. "For your expedition, I pressed some flowers from the greenhouse samples we saved together. The rest of the pages are blank. Fill them with your discoveries. Come home with stories." His voice dropped to a whisper. "Come home to me." "I will," she promised. "I will go, and I will discover, and I will return. I need to do this, Adrian, to know I chose you as myself, not as someone who gave up her dreams. I know. That is why I am letting you go." They stood together in the observatory, watching the stars wheel overhead, and Evangeline felt something settle in her chest. This was right. The journey and the return, the freedom and the choice. The next 3 months passed in a flurry of preparation. Evangeline assembled her expedition equipment, studied maps of the Amazon, corresponded with other scientists who had traveled there. Adrian helped her, offering contacts, suggesting research avenues, equipping her with the finest instruments he could procure. They grew closer in those months, but carefully, always aware of the year's time limit, always conscious that she would leave and might not return as his wife. The day she boarded the ship, Adrian came to see her off. He stood on the dock in the early morning twilight, wearing dark glasses and a heavy coat despite the mild weather. "Write to me," he said again. "Every week," she promised. "Be safe, be brilliant, be yourself. And you," she touched his face gently, "you take care of the greenhouse, study your stars, wait for me, always." She kissed him then, there on the dock with the crew watching and the morning light growing. Kissed him with all the hope and fear and love she had been holding inside. Then she walked up the gangplank and did not look back, because if she looked back, she would not be able to leave. The Amazon was everything she had dreamed, vast jungles teeming with unknown plants, rivers that snaked through green wilderness, birds in colors she had never imagined. She collected specimens, made notes, sketched endlessly. She worked alongside other scientists, finally part of a community that valued her mind. But every discovery made her think of Adrian. Every rare flower made her want to share it with him. Every night under the stars, she looked for the one he had named after her, knowing he was looking at the same constellations from his observatory. She wrote to him weekly, as promised. Long letters describing her findings, her adventures, the challenges and triumphs of expedition life. And he wrote back, letters that arrived in bundles when they reached ports, full of greenhouse updates and astronomical observations and careful, growing admissions of how much he missed her. 3 months into the expedition, deep in the rainforest, Evangeline made her greatest discovery. A flower that bloomed only at night, its petals a deep purple that seemed to glow in the darkness. It thrived in shadow, required little light, and was more beautiful than anything she had ever seen. She stood in the jungle night, holding the carefully wrapped specimen, and suddenly she was crying, because this flower reminded her of someone who thrived in darkness. Someone who had taught her that shadow was not absence of light, but a different kind of illumination. She wanted to go home, not because the expedition was over, not because her year was almost up, but because every discovery felt incomplete without Adrian to share it with. Because she had proven to herself that she could do this, could be a scientist, could contribute to the field, and now she wanted to share that success with the one person who had always believed she could. She finished the expedition, 6 months in the Amazon, exactly as planned. She collected specimens, published preliminary findings, earned respect from her peers. She did everything she had set out to do. But on the ship back to England, she stood at the rail and counted the days until she could see Adrian again. The journey seemed to take forever. Every port, every delay, every calm sea that slowed their progress felt like torture. She clutched the specimen case holding the night-blooming flower, her most precious discovery, and showing it to Adrian, his face when he saw it, his careful hands examining the petals, his brilliant mind already forming hypotheses about its unique properties. The ship finally docked in London on a grey afternoon. Evangeline hired a carriage immediately, not even stopping at her mother's house. She had sent word ahead that she was returning, but not when she would arrive. She wanted to surprise him. The journey to Yorkshire felt even longer than the voyage from South America. Evangeline could not sit still. She checked and rechecked the specimen case, rehearsed what she would say, changed her mind about what she would say, wondered if he would even want to see her. What if he had moved on? What if 6 months apart had made him realize he was better off alone? What if... The carriage rolled to a stop in front of Thornwood Hall. Twilight was falling, painting the sky in shades of purple and gold. Perfect timing. Evangeline climbed out, paid the driver, and stood for a moment looking at the estate. It seemed less forbidding now. Or perhaps she simply knew what waited inside. She did not bother with the front door. Instead, she walked around the house to the greenhouse, her heart pounding. The glass structure glowed with warm light. Through the windows, she could see plants thriving, lush and green. He had kept them alive, kept their work going. She pushed open the door and stepped inside. Adrian was there, bent over a workbench, making notes by lamplight. He wore no jacket, his shirt sleeves rolled up, looking exactly as he had the first time she saw him. He did not hear her enter over the sound of the fountain. Evangeline stood there, drinking in the sight of him, 6 months of longing crystallizing into this single moment. Adrian. He looked up, dropped his pen, stared at her as though he could not quite believe she was real. Evangeline? I found something extraordinary in the Amazon, she said, her voice shaking. A flower that only blooms in darkness. It thrives in shadow, needs very little light, and is more beautiful than anything I have ever seen. It reminded me of someone. He stood slowly, his eyes never leaving her face. You came back. Did you think I would not? I hoped. But I thought perhaps the Amazon would offer you everything you needed. Perhaps you would choose to stay, to continue your work there, to what? To give up the man I love because I am too stubborn to admit I need him as much as my work. She set down the specimen case and moved toward him. I went to the Amazon to prove something to myself, to know that I could choose you freely, not because a contract forced me, not because circumstances trapped me, but because I wanted you. And? His voice was rough. Every discovery I made, I wanted to share with you. Every night under the stars, I looked for the one you named after me. Every letter you sent made me miss you more. She stopped in front of him, close enough to touch. I chose freedom, Adrian. The freedom to choose you. Not because of a contract or duty. Because you gave me the world and asked nothing in return. Because you saw me and I saw you, and somehow an accidental betrothal became the most intentional thing in my life. Evangeline. He reached for her, his hands framing her face. I have been counting the days, not sleeping, barely breathing, waiting for you, terrified you would use the annulment clause. I do not want an annulment. I want a marriage, a real one. She leaned into his touch. I want to work beside you in this greenhouse. I want to study the stars from your observatory. I want to fill journals with our combined observations. Her voice broke. I want you, Adrian. Is that still what you want? His answer was a kiss, desperate and tender and full of 6 months of waiting. Evangeline melted into him, her hands fisting in his shirt, and felt like she was finally, truly home. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, Adrian rested his forehead against hers. I wrote you so many letters I never sent, he confessed. Letters saying I loved you, that I was proud of you, that I missed you so much it hurt, but I could not send them, could not pressure you, could not make you feel obligated to return. I wish you had sent them, because I wrote the same letters. She smiled through tears. We are both fools, you know, 2 brilliant scientists who could not simply admit what we felt. Then let me admit it now. He pulled back enough to look into her eyes. I love you, Evangeline Blackwood. I loved you when you were deceiving me in my greenhouse. I loved you when you left for the Amazon. I loved you every day you were gone, and I will love you every day you stay, if you will stay. I will stay. She kissed him again. I will stay and work and love you and argue with you about botanical classifications and beat you at chess and fill your observatory with plant specimens and drive you absolutely mad. I cannot wait. They stayed in the greenhouse until full dark, talking and kissing and making plans. Evangeline showed him the night-blooming flower, and his face lit up with the same wonder she had felt when she discovered it. They examined it together, already hypothesizing about its unique properties, already planning papers they would write. What will you name it? Adrian asked, carefully sketching the flower's structure. Blackwoody rediscovered, Evangeline said, because some of the best things in life are found when you stop running and come home. Adrian set down his pencil and pulled an envelope from his jacket pocket. I have something for you as well. It arrived yesterday. Evangeline opened it and found a letter from the Royal Society. They had accepted a joint paper on nocturnal pollination, the research she and Adrian had done together through their notes, compiled and submitted under both their names. We are published scientists, Adrian said, together. A partnership of minds and hearts. A marriage of both, Evangeline agreed, laughing and crying at the same time. Over the following weeks, they fell into a new rhythm. Evangeline adjusted her schedule to work twilight hours alongside Adrian. They collaborated on research, combining his nighttime observations with her daytime experiments. The greenhouse thrived under their joint care, plants from around the world growing alongside Evangeline's Amazon specimens. She brought home more than just plants from her expedition. She brought confidence, credentials, connections. The scientific community took her seriously now. Journals published her papers. Universities invited her to lecture. She was becoming the botanist she had always dreamed of being. But the best part of every day was the hours she spent with Adrian, working side by side, talking about everything and nothing, discovering each other as thoroughly as they discovered new plant species. They were married in truth now, not just in law. They shared a bedroom, though Adrian still spent much of the night in his observatory while Evangeline slept. She would wake sometimes to find him sketching beside her, capturing the way moonlight fell across her face. You are supposed to be studying stars, she would murmur sleepily. I am studying the brightest star in my sky, he would reply, and kiss her forehead. 3 months after Evangeline's return, Adrian found her in the greenhouse at twilight, sketching a specimen that only bloomed at dusk. I have something for you, he said. She looked up, curious. He handed her a letter bearing the seal of the Royal Society. Evangeline scanned it quickly, then laughed. They want us to present our research. Both of us. Will you go? She set the letter aside and took his hand. Do you want to? I asked you first. Adrian. She pulled him closer. I didn't come back from halfway around the world just to leave again. She gestured to the greenhouse around them, the plants thriving in their carefully balanced environment. Everything I want is right here. He studied her face. You're certain? Completely, she smiled. Let them read our papers if they're interested. I'd rather stay here and argue with you about soil composition. We don't argue about soil composition. We will if you keep using too much sand. Adrian laughed and pulled her into his arms. Outside, stars began to appear. Inside, the night-blooming flowers opened their petals. And 2 people who had been accidentally betrothed discovered that sometimes the greatest adventures aren't found in distant lands or grand symposiums. Sometimes they're built quietly, in greenhouses and observatories, with the person who sees you clearly in any light. If you enjoyed this story, please subscribe to the channel and hit the notification bell so you never miss a new romance. Your like helps us bring you more stories like this one. Evangeline and Adrian's journey reminds us that true freedom isn't the absence of commitment, it's the presence of choice. Real love doesn't trap us in obligation. It gives us wings precisely because we choose it freely, every single day. The most extraordinary adventures aren't always found in distant lands or grand achievements. Sometimes they're discovered in the quiet moments with someone who sees us completely, who gives us space to grow, and who we choose again and again, not because we must, but because we want to. If this story touched your heart, please leave a comment below sharing your thoughts. Subscribe for more historical romances, and don't forget to like this video. Thank you for listening, and until next time, may you find your own extraordinary adventure in the everyday.